Right. Afternoon, all. Hope you're all well. Welcome to another session of computer architecture. And naturally, as discussed, we are going to be looking at printers as far as today's session is concerned. I think the main focus is also going to be on assessment. So obviously what you're going to be asked of as far as your assessments are concerned, inclusive of your assignment and naturally the actual up and coming exam, obviously a little later on, naturally after your test. So we've been discussing the whole concept of your computing system naturally in terms of the different components that make up the machine. I think we've been mentioning this for lectures on end now in terms of obviously having your computer system being split up or in terms of software, hardware. And as far as the hardware is concerned, I think our main focus was on the different components, like I was mentioning a couple of seconds ago, your CPU, RAM, motherboard, the actual hard drives that I asked of you in terms of the recorded sessions to have a quick look at. And it's imperative for us to understand that naturally, with all those components put together, your computer system literally doesn't work as a lone entity. I think when we were discussing the whole concept of your computing process, we mentioned the fact that your computing process incorporates input, process, output, storage, and eventually connectivity to a network. And ultimately, it's imperative for you to discuss peripheral components or peripheral devices, those particular components within your computing environment that literally complement the computer system and aid in providing for better functionality or better service, if you want to look at it from a different convention. So when you look at the output associated with your computing process, I think we've mentioned printers, speakers, and literally looking at the whole concept of monitors as different aspects or different components or different peripherals that are literally responsible for providing that output associated with your computing mechanism. So what we're looking at as far as today's session would go is concentrate on literally one of them, which enables us to convert any soft copy material. Remember, soft copy is anything that is stored within the computer system or stored on your storage medium, like your hard drive. Though that particular hard drive obviously can be internal or external, or your flash drives, as far as content would go. So conversion of that stored content into hard copy, and hard copy is obviously any printed material that you find across the board. So if I was to quickly, let me see if I can quickly share my screen here, just to look at notes that we can create as we go along. So naturally, when you look at the whole concept of output, like we were saying earlier on, you're just converting your soft copy material into hard copy. So soft copy, stored content, and literally hard copy, anything that is printed. So normally you'll find that these printers are typically literally classified in what they call multi-function devices, or MFDs, what literally makes up what's happening with your printers. So when you look at multifunction devices, like I was saying earlier on, you equate that to your generic printers. And naturally, as far as these configurations would go, I think maybe more specifically the printers that we're looking at that literally are associated with your multifunction will be what they call all-in-one configurations. And what's happening with these all-in-one printers, literally, these all-in-one printers enable connectivity, or rather, to be more specific, they enable a usage that enables your basic printing. You can also discuss your fax. You can also discuss the whole concept of copying. And then you can also even discuss the whole concept of a scan. So this is the generics associated with the basic all-in-one printing mechanism there. So it enables you to actually print, enables you to fax, enables you to look at copying and then generically scanning. Remember, when you look at scan, you're literally again converting your hard copy back to soft copy so that can be sent via email. I think that's more applicable as far as fax comparisons are concerned. That's the reason why you will normally find that literally the all-in-ones that you will look at now would encompass printing, would obviously look at copying, will also encompass scanning, because your fax environments, they are slightly, I think if you want to be more specific about it, a bit obsolete now, because your scan becomes a default go-to in terms of you working with any hard copy that needs to be sent across any distinctive networks. But you've got different types of printers that naturally exist. So obviously, this is all to do with multifunction devices or all-in-one configurations. But when you want to discuss printers at large, you've got different types of printers that exist. Obviously, our focus is going to be on specific types of printers that exist, specifically looking at inkjet, laser, and your impact. So you've got impact printers. You can also even discuss the whole concept of inkjet printing, also known as ink dispersion. Maybe let's just do it this way. You can also even discuss laser printing. So I think when you're looking at it from an assignment point of view, remember, you're going to be literally comparing inkjet and laser, giving your generic representation, as well as recommendation in terms of which one of those particular printers will be applicable in the environment that has been asked of as far as the actual assignment would go. You can also discuss what is known as dye sublimation printing. And then you can also throw into the foray there thermal printing. I think you can also even discuss, let's see if we got enough space here. You can also even discuss 3D and virtual. Right. So obviously, as far as our main focus would go, impact, inkjet, and laser printing becomes your default go-to. Just understanding exactly how these function, because they're more applicable within the industry, especially when you're looking at it from a PC tech environment. Obviously, you can delve into 3D printing as well, which is a typical architecture that has also become quite relevant to a certain extent as far as the actual industry is concerned. But naturally, your impact, your inkjet, and literally your laser printing becomes default go-tos there. So impact printers literally are printers that generically create images on paper by literally physically striking any particular ink ribbon against a paper surface. As far as functionality would go. And normally, I think the first type of impact printing were known as daisy wheel printers. If you want to look at it from a different point of view, I think your author also mentions that these are literally likened to your electronic typewriters that literally attach to a basic computer system with a keyboard directly. And you also have what is known as dot matrix. So the initial types of impact printing. So if you look at what you want to concentrate on, so your impact printers, you've got what is known as your daisy wheel. You've got what is known as daisy wheel printing, and then you will also encounter your generic dot matrix printers. So dot matrix. So you'll discover that your daisy wheels are literally not as common now. I think they've become generically obsolete as far as basic functionality is concerned. What you'll find now associated with your industry environments would obviously be your generic dot matrix printing mechanisms. Normally, these are the ones that you'll find associated with the basic creation of what is happening as far as your invoices, your receipting. So anything to do with bulk printing that doesn't literally need or doesn't engage a lot of quality associated with the actual print, and at the same time looking at the whole concept of speed not being something that is relevant as far as your specific environments would go. Your dot matrix become your default go-tos in that environment. So anything to do with point of sale, anything to do with creation of your receipting or printing of your receipting or invoices, your dot matrix becomes a default go-to there because it's more economic in that distinctive environment as far as basic functionality within your specific environments there would go. So I think one of the other things you also need to take into consideration, especially when you're looking at it from a printing point of view, is that with your printers, you also need to look at quality associated with print. So generically speaking, if you want to look at it from a different point of view, normally with your printing, you're literally what you are literally considering is speed of print. So how fast are you going to get print mechanisms there? And then you're also discussing the quality of print. So you've got speed of print and the quality of printing within your distinctive environment there. So speed and quality of print. So normally your speed is measured in what they call pages per minute. And then when you're looking at quality, you're looking at dots per inch. All right, so DPI for quality, and then pages per minute for your speed. So literally what this typically means is that the higher the number, the better the quality as far as your setups are concerned. So higher ppm means that your printer is ultimately faster, and then literally the higher the quality or the higher the number in terms of DPI, the better the quality associated with your print mechanism in that distinctive environment. All right, so that is one of the two things that you need to literally consider when you're discussing the whole concept of quality there. But when you go back to the whole concept of dot matrix printing, your quality is not as brilliant in this particular environment, because what this literally uses is what they call, let's see if we can write this properly, what they call NLQ, which is short for near letter quality. So one of the most basic types of qualities associated with your printing mechanism within your environment. So dot matrix, very basic, but are still relevant in environments. Why? Because like I said before, quite economic when it comes to printing your receipting and your basic invoicing within your establishments. So the other thing that you also want to consider, I think if you want to look at it from a different point of view, is that most of these printers will also use what they call duplex assemblies. So what that typically means is that it enables the printer to actually automatically print on both sides of the actual paper itself. Some printers will obviously come with this basically built in, but in some instances, it's a piece of additional hardware that are literally supposed to be incorporated within the actual printing mechanism itself. So on the other hand, if you want to look at your ink dispersion, or literally your inkjet printers, you're looking at a scenario where you've got your inkjet printers. And remember what we mentioned as far as these particular inkjet printers, they are concerned now, it's also known as ink dispersion printing. And instead of literally having a print head that is responsible for incorporating images on paper by striking a ribbon with comparison to your dot matrix environments, this time you've got an actual platform that is responsible for spraying ink on the actual paper itself. So instead of having a print head that is responsible for incorporating or functioning with a ribbon, if you want to look at it from a different point of view, these inkjet printers would obviously use a print head that is literally connected to an ink cartridge. All right, and this particular cartridge would obviously would have ink contained within it to obviously assist with creation of the images as far as your paper environments there would go. So if you were to look at different comparisons in terms of what is incorporated within an actual dot matrix printer versus what is actually incorporated within an actual inkjet printer, you find that there's quite a massive difference in terms of functionality. And these cartridges, so these particular printers would have cartridges that are obviously supposed to, so you've got cartridges that are responsible for housing your ink. All right, so this is responsible literally for housing our ink. And when you look at these particular ink cartridges, normally when you discuss these particular type of printers, even when you discuss the whole concept of laser printing, you will normally discuss mono. So you normally have mono. So normally mono is just basic black and white, or literally if you want to just look at it from a different point of view, just your black cartridge there. And then you also have color. So when it comes to color, normally when you're discussing your inkjet configurations, these cartridges come in 4 distinctive colors by default. So what CYMK would literally stand for would be cyan as a color, yellow, magenta, and black. So your C, Y, M, and naturally K is what is happening as far as your ink cartridges there would go. So obviously with these particular ink cartridges, like I was mentioning earlier on, you can either have a mono, which is just black, and then color, dependent on configurations that you're using. And it's all dependent in terms of the actual brand across the board. So you'll discover that most of these inkjet printers are actually quite affordable, but where the catch is that you spend quite a massive chunk in terms of the actual ink, because the cartridges don't last as long as anyone would have hoped to. So normally you find that these particular type of printers will be more applicable for the small home office environment. As far as your particular setup would go. So personal use applicable, because more often than not, we don't use that much paper, we don't do that much printing. But the moment you want to go bulk, or the moment you want to look at it from a different organizational point of view, then obviously your laser printing becomes a default go-to. So your inkjet printers not as pricey, or literally relatively affordable, but where the catch is you go through a lot of these ink cartridges more often than you would literally want to. That's where the cost implication is when you're discussing the whole concept of your inkjet environment. So if you look at it, let's see if I can quickly share screening here, go back to images that we can use to understand exactly what's happening. Uh, 2 seconds here. Right, there we go. So that's a typical example of what a basic all-in-one printer would distinctively look like. And as far as these particular printers are concerned, like we mentioned before, will have your print, fax, scan, and ultimately copy. Although, like I was mentioning right at the beginning of the session there, you'll normally find that most of them now only come with 3 basic functionalities, which is your print, scan, and copy. Why? Because your fax is now literally more of an obsolete type of architecture. Obviously, still in use But I think more individuals are more comfortable with converting your hard copy to soft copy and then send it via email. So your scan becomes a default go-to in terms of configuration. And this is a typical example now of what a basic dot matrix printer would look like, an Epson version of it. As far as functionality would go, like we mentioned earlier on, you've got a print head, you've got a ribbon that is there. And the whole concept of it being an impact printer is having the ribbon struck to obviously struck, and obviously you've got a ribbon in between there that then is used to create images on pieces of paper, dependent on what you've got incorporated there. And then on the other hand, if you want to look at it now in terms of internals, this is what your basic dot matrix internals would distinctively look like. So your dot matrix, like I was saying earlier on, is just the most common version or most common type of impact printers that are still in existence. You've got a printhead that is there, and that's your ribbon. Naturally, every particular printer would have onboard electronics that obviously enable it to receive commands from your computer system in general to be able to work with distinctive print jobs. You've got a power supply naturally, and you've got a platen that is there, normally associated with the whole concept of ultimately feeding paper configurations there. But if you're now then supposed to look at what your inkjet printer would look like on the other hand, now instead of having an actual ribbon incorporated there, you now have your printhead and cartridge caddy incorporated. And like we were mentioning earlier on, obviously, if you're dealing with a mono type of printing mechanism, you only are distinctively looking at black there. That is more applicable when you discuss laser printers. And then when you're discussing color, you obviously have your default color cartridges that are there, which would include your cyan, magenta, your yellow and black, like we were mentioning earlier on. And then on the other hand, if you now want to look at what actually takes place in terms of incorporating content, now remember we were talking about a nozzle that is then used to spray ink droplets on your piece of paper and to literally formulate the actual image that is there as far as configurations would go. And then you've got your horizontal plates that are incorporated, not forgetting the actual ink fountains associated with that distinctive mechanism. So like I was just mentioning that there's a distinct difference now. I think that's the reason why it's imperative for us to understand that the moment you want to go better quality with your printing, your inkjet printers are default go-tos. But again, like we were just mentioning earlier on, instead of now just dealing with your near letter quality, you're now discussing dots per inch, and the higher the number, the better the quality. The only discrepancy, literally, when it comes to inkjet printing, like I was mentioning a couple of moments ago, is the whole concept of the actual cost of ink cartridges within these specific environments. Now, when you're looking at comparison, so I think if we go back, let's see if we can look at what is happening with. Okay, I think we can move that forward. And then this is a typical example of what basic ink cartridges would look like. Obviously, they would vary in terms of shape and size, dependent on the brand. Remember, there's a whole host of industries and brands out there that are responsible for obviously creation, manufacture, and deployment of these printers. So Epson is a typical example. You can talk about Canon. You can also have Brother as some of the examples of some of the printing organizations that are out there, or brands that are out there, as far as your mechanisms would go. And again, like I was mentioning a couple of seconds ago, shapes and size will ultimately be different depending on the brand. But this is a typical example of what some of the Epson printing ink cartridges for your inkjet environments would distinctively look like. And you'll find that in recent years, these particular manufacturers, especially Epson and Canon, have literally introduced some inkjet printers that have refillable ink tanks, So instead of actually having to go out and buy a new cartridge, you can literally refill with their particular grade in terms of the actual ink itself, just to ensure that you don't get any problems when you continue to function your device there. So it makes it a lot easier for customers in terms of usage, because like I was mentioning earlier on, I think the main discrepancy was the actual cost of having to replace these particular cartridges should the ink literally have distinctively ran out there. So when you look at when you look at your laser printers now, on the other hand, remember we were mentioning the fact that if you want to look at basic printing, home use, your inkjet printers are your default go-tos. But obviously, the moment you want to now discuss the whole concept of bulk printing in specific environments, so bulk printing still maintaining the quality there, your laser printers will be your default go-to. So I think if you go back, let me see if I can reshare my screen here again. So if you go back to the images that we were using, what you've got on screen there is a typical example of what a basic laser printer would look like. Now remember, shape and size, again, ultimately dependent on brand and manufacturer, but functionality is one and the same thing. So normally laser printers now, instead of using the ink dispersion architecture or configuration, they would literally use a process called electrophotographic imaging associated with printing. So obviously these particular printers would literally produce high quality and high speed output of literally both text and graphics that are there. So it's imperative for you to just get an understanding where these particular printers are more applicable. If you're in a much larger office and you still want to maintain quality of print, but you're still looking at printing multiple copies of anything, literally, when it comes to your documentation, your laser printers are the more appropriate printers to go with, because it's actually you would want to argue that they're literally cost effective. And instead of using an ink cartridge, they would literally use a toner cartridge. And normally when you look at toner, it's normally a very fine powder that is mixed with metal as well as plastic filaments that are then responsible for incorporating images on your actual paper itself. So just very fine powder, normally associated with plastic and metal iron filaments there that are then responsible for incorporating content on the actual paper itself. So from an assessment point of view, it's very important for you to remember the actual laser print process, what actually takes place when printing is incorporated. So a typical example of, and also familiarize yourself with the different components associated with the actual printer itself. So if you're looking at what we were discussing a couple of moments back, the actual internals associated with the dot matrix, and internals associated with an inkjet printer, and what you see on screen now is a typical example of the internals that are associated with your laser printed there. So you will still have your system board. You've got memory that is there, obviously that would work as a buffer in certain instances. You've got the cartridge, you've got your power supply still exists. Naturally, the paper tray system board all the way to your gearbox or motors are incorporated there. So it's important to understand what each one of these would do, and ultimately also look at the laser print process in general, just to avail for proper configurations there. All right, so if you want to look at what the tone actually looks like, that's a typical example of what you've got on the screen. So I think you can see the distinct difference between what we initially saw with your inkjet ink cartridges versus your toner cartridge. Naturally more applicable in environments like we've been mentioning earlier on, where you're looking at bulk printing across the board there. So with the laser print process, it's imperative for us to understand what is happening. Obviously, if you go back with the actual generic devices there, some of the things that you might want to discuss, like we mentioned earlier on, your toner cartridge, obviously, you obviously have this particularly supplying toner that creates the image on the actual paper itself. If you're discussing the imaging drum, this is also known as the photosensitive drum. That obviously its main responsibility there is to look at the whole concept of charging your drum, so that you can obviously attract the filaments that we were talking about within the actual toner cartridge itself. You've got the erase lamp responsible for exposing the entire surface of imaging to light, primary corona all the way down to your sensor and switches there. So I think if you look at your prescribed textbook, especially if you're discussing the 10th edition there, you'd want to look through pages 1782, so 1782, all the way down to 1789. That will just have an idea of what is happening in terms of the different components that are incorporated within your actual printing mechanism there. So the other thing as well that you, like I was mentioning earlier on, before you look at the different types of printers, is understanding the laser print process. All right, very important for you to remember, not just from an assessment point of view, but obviously within your own professional and personal spaces, just to understand exactly what literally happens when a laser printer functions. So if you go back to our notes here, let's see if we can go back to our notes. So what we've got is all right, so what you've got as far as the basic laser print process, so you've got what is known as the laser print process. So laser printing process here. And you'll normally have distinctive stages that are incorporated there. The first thing that you want to distinctively look at is processing. Then you've got charging. You want to discuss exposing. Developing is another one. You want to also look at transferring. Fusing. And eventually cleaning. So that's your generic laser print process that is there associated with naturally your laser printer. So if you want to look at it from a different point of view here, what you literally have I'm going to go back. All right. Right, so there you have it. So from a diagrammatical point of view, if you're looking at a basic diagram there, this is what normally happens when you're looking at the whole concept of the laser print process. So processing all the way down to cleaning. And what you find as RIP in that particular image, this is, so here, if you go, let's see if we can actually incorporate some content there. So what you see as RIP, so this particular part, this is short for, let's see if we can write this down nicely. Your raster Maybe that is not as visible as we would have wanted. But anyway, I can always write it back. I can always maybe write it as far as the actual notes is concerned. But I think what I wanted you to actually focus on is that RIP part. So that is short for raster image processor, right? So its main purpose is to literally transform the image, which is literally known as a raster image, into commands to the actual laser that is responsible for incorporating content on the actual paper itself. So the document that we've got there that we want to print is literally only visible if we've got this particular mechanism put in place that then enables translation of the actual initial image, which is just a pattern of dots that are then incorporated onto the actual paper itself. So it's just a form of or you can look at it as a standard or some kind of architecture that is responsible for converting or translating the actual image, which is just a pattern of dots, into command so that the laser can literally incorporate content. So this RIP takes the digital information about such content as fonts, graphics, and obviously converts it into an actual image made up of the dots that can literally then be printed within your setup. So if you look at each one of these particular stages, if you want to look at it from a different point of view, you've got the first thing, which is your processing. And again, like we were mentioning earlier on, that RIP processes the raster image, and then your primary charge, as far as the actual roller is concerned, is responsible for charging the drum, because this is the drum that is going to then be used to create an indivisible image on paper that is then literally used to attract the toner from the toner cartridge onto the paper itself, so that we can begin to start formulating or forming an actual image on the paper there. So you've got your process in charge as one of the first stages there of your print process. Then you've got your particular laser. Now, when you're discussing the exposing, the particular laser is responsible for exposing the drum with the actual raster image itself. So what you're doing when that image has been, you haven't started printing. So the drum is just responsible for incorporating the actual, that's the reason why I was mentioning that if you want to look at it from a different point of view, it's more or less like you're talking about an invisible image that is on the drum itself that will then be transferred onto the actual paper itself. So as you can see on what we've got as an image there, literally what we want to typically print there is what is then incorporated onto the drum itself. And then after that, you now have the actual image that is now being developed. And how would you be developing this image? By literally applying the toner to the actual drum itself. So remember, once we've done that, we've created the image and incorporated the image on the drum. That image will then be transferred to paper, and the toner fused accordingly, so that at least those particles that we were talking about earlier on don't just drop off the actual paper itself. They actually fuse onto the paper and become an image that we are literally familiar with as far as your environments there would go. So image is developed by applying the actual toner to the imaging drum, and then literally once you've done that, you now have transferring of the image onto the actual paper itself. All right, so transfer of the image onto the paper, still not enough, because you still need to fuse to ensure that the toner that has been incorporated there on the paper, like I was just mentioning a couple of moments ago, does not drop off the actual paper itself. And then once that is done, you've got your fusing process, which is the next stage. And now your image is fused to the actual paper itself. All right, so now literally what we've got is some kind of permanence associated with the image that has been transferred from the actual drum to the given paper. Because you've got other print jobs that would be coming, that particular drum obviously needs to be cleaned. All right, so that's the last part that you've got as far as the actual laser print process there would go. You now have the cleaning part, and literally the drum rather is being cleaned to enable the next job to be sent through and printed accordingly without any distinctive discrepancies that you will find there. All right, so that's the basics in terms of your laser print process. Like I was saying earlier on, processing, charging, exposing, developing, transferring, fusing, and then the last thing that you're looking at is naturally the cleaning there to enable or to enable literally a clean print job that is going to be following the one that you just have literally completed. So this is something that you want to familiarize yourself, especially from an assessment point of view, like I was mentioning earlier on. Just ensure that you're familiar with how to distinctively describe what the laser print process is all about, and obviously know the stages in their correct order. So you're processing all the way to cleaning, ensure that you know those in their correct order there. All right, and then if you were to look at it from so I think we've got something coming through here from Tembu. All right, so Tembu, there you were mentioning the whole concept of your laser printer being more pricier than an inkjet. So the cost-effective pen. Okay, so literally, so what we were mentioning earlier on, the reason why your laser printer, if you were going to go with one, would work for you is that you don't go through as much a toner cartridge as you would when you're comparing it to an inkjet. So while an inkjet might be relatively cheaper when it comes to pricing, the cost implication of an inkjet comes when you are going to be replacing your inkjet, your cartridges, a lot more than distinctively necessary. So to give you an example, normally you might find, just for argument's sake, you might find a basic inkjet printer for about $600 as far as cost would go, but you'll discover that if you're going to be replacing your cartridges, so your ink cartridges, that would literally cost you about $400-500 depending on the type of cartridge that you go with. So that is almost the actual cost of the printer itself. So imagine going through those many cartridges, probably twice, thrice, or even 4 times a year, dependent. You end up actually literally spending a lot more when it comes. So the total cost of ownership that we've always been talking about becomes a lot more when you're looking at it from a inkjet printer perspective as opposed to a laser printer, because you don't go through your toner cartridges as much as you would with your inkjet with your inkjet comparisons there. That's the reason why your laser printers become default go-tos. I mean, if you or rather, if you want to look at it from a cost perspective, your laser printer becomes more applicable as opposed to you working with an inkjet. Not sure if that answers your question there, Tembu. You can just let me know via chat there if you're sorted as far as that basic explanation. That's why, like I was mentioning earlier on, what this would then also do is assist with the 4th question of your assignment, because like we were mentioning earlier on, you're looking at basic comparisons between these. So you've got things to consider when you're looking at comparison between these 2 types of printers, literally the cost implication, literally environments in which they're used, the ease of troubleshooting, the actual speed and quality of print. Those are some of the examples of some of the considerations that you might want to take into light there when you're literally answering that question there. So Tembu, just give me a heads up there in chat if you're good to go with that answer. All right. So if you go back, where were we? Yeah. So we just finished explaining that. So again, like I was saying earlier on, just familiarize yourself with these, just to be sorted when it comes to the assessment point of view. And then the other thing that you also want to discuss is 3D printers. So this is one example of what a 3D printer would look like. Something that has been around for a couple of years now, but literally gaining a bit more momentum when it comes to usage, when it comes to relevance, and also when it comes to basic ownership in basic environments there. So generically, 3D printers normally would use basic material, normally that's melted, to create prints within, as the name would say, 3D objects or three-dimensional objects. And normally most of the common ones would use plastic filaments that are then used to create these components within your setups. So a typical example of the filaments that we're talking about is what you've got on screen now. So that's a typical example of 3D printer plastic filaments that are used to create the actual object that you'll find. And normally, when it comes to design, you've got certain programs like your AutoCAD and so on that are responsible for creating some of these objects that are then directly translated to the printer itself, that then would enable you to create it. So if you want to look at it from a management point of view, this is a typical example of how you'd literally manage a new 3D print job, by obviously creating and designing your image that is then incorporated within the printer and then literally created there. All right, so that's the generics when you're looking at it from 3D printing mechanisms. One of the other things as well that you obviously want to familiarize yourself with, especially when you're looking at it from a Windows point of view, that there are different terms that you will need to familiarize yourself with. In terms of defining what an actual printer is, defining what is known as a spooler, defining what's happening as far as a driver would go. So if you look at it from this particular point of view, your Windows doesn't literally identify to printer as the actual device that converts the soft copy we were talking about earlier on to hard copy. Literally what is happening there is that instead you've got the term print device that is typically associated with what is happening within this environment. The actual, so the physical printer is what we call a print device, especially when you're looking at it from a Windows perspective. Right, and then obviously you've got print drivers and spoolers that are incorporated there. What is distinctively happening in this particular setup? Remember, your spooler is just a program that is responsible for queuing print jobs. So remember, you can send multiple print jobs to your printer. There has to be some mechanism that prioritizes these print jobs, so that puts them in a queue and prints them according to importance or according to priority. And in terms of are we looking at first come first serve, or are we looking at it from a specific print job that probably has more pages or less pages? This will go on and on. So your spooler's main purpose is just to queue print jobs. And again, like I mentioned before, within Windows, the printer is not an actual physical device, but literally a program that is used to control printers. So one or more printers. So a printer in Windows is just a program that is responsible for ensuring proper control of these physical print devices. And then obviously we are all familiar with your drivers. I think we've discussed this before. So your print drivers are then responsible to enable the user to access or work with that specific device within any given operating system environment. So your driver's main purpose is just to allow a specific device to be accessible and used through an application within a distinctive operating system. So this is something as well from an assessment point of view that you need to remember, so that from a Windows point of view, the physical printer that we're all familiar with is known as a print device. And then the term printer is used to associate a program, or to indicate a program that is used to control the actual physical device. And then on the other hand, a print spooler is a program that queues print jobs, so that puts them in distinctive order and according to size, priority, or which particular print job was sent first, whichever way you want to look at it. And then your print driver is obviously responsible for enabling a user to be able to work with or to access that particular device within an operating system platform. So it's very important for you to familiarize yourself with that. So if you want to look at how you'd select printing, so I think if you want to share my screen again, if you want to look at adding a printer within your environments, it's important to look at it from a specific perspective. Excuse me, got tongue tied there. So what you want to do is, if I was going to share this, see if I can quickly actually share my direct screen so that you can have a quick look in terms of how we can literally add printers and incorporate content. Where can I let's see if we can quickly share this. Right. So if you want to look at sharing your printers there, so what we want to do here is we're going to just in your search bar there, type out printers. Normally you find that printers and scanners is going to be incorporated there. So what you want to do is select your printers and scanners. And once you've done that, it takes you to a window that enables you to actually add printers or scanners on your particular computer system. So in this particular example, I've already got an HP DeskJet 3050 printer that has been added. There is currently offline, not directly connected to it. But should you want to add, just select your add. And, normally, these printers can be obviously added or can be connected. So you can also connect to Wi-Fi. It all depends. So if there's something that is automatically pick up, but if not, it will give you an option to literally manage a printer. And then once you look at manual addition of these printers, select either an IP address, an actual name for the or add in drivers that are relevant there. So as you can see in our example, we've got the printer that I want is not listed or isn't listed. We're going to select that particular part there. And then from what you see on screen, add configuration. So literally add a print, your IP address, you mix that, and then you can add in your IP address for the actual print itself. So as an example here, we can 10.0.0. And as you can see, the moment we're incorporating the actual IP address, it's also being copied as far as the host name is concerned. You next the right IP address, then you go as far as connectivity go. And again, you can look at adding a Bluetooth wireless printer. You can also look at adding a local printer. So normally with manual settings, that last option, if we select next here and we use the existing port, we've discussed dedicated printer ports before. Remember, there you had these, but now literally all could be but print being identified as an LPT printer, find the one that is distinctively. And then here is where you can then select the appropriate driver. With the whole concept of driver to add and use the correct driver to avoid intermittent function of your computer system as far as your particular configurations would go, for you to function accordingly, just to avoid any discrepancies that might arise. So you might normally find there, but if not, use the have disk option. Then also probably add a printer from your external drives, or literally from something that is been directly downloaded onto your hard drive, dependent on what you're looking at there. So this is just different ways of you adding in printers. And you can also use printer management. Are my cartridges still full, or do I still have enough ink for a couple of print jobs? If not, I might need to buy new and order new cartridges. You can also even use the same printer software to look at proper calibration, which is making sure that your colors are incorporated within the right convention, your print jobs are incorporated accordingly on the actual paper itself. So now, example, remember this, and literally open my program here. It should be able to try and identify the printer. Naturally not connected currently, but literally this is what your package would look like. So it shows you your estimated levels associated with the actual cartridges themselves. And then you can also get basic device information. What is the serial number? What's the actual firmware version associated with that printer itself? So just quite a nifty tool that just shows you information that might be relevant in terms of you functioning and working with your printer accordingly. Again, you've got basic utilities that are there, printer software, HP print and scan doctor updates that are relevant. So this is just all to do with proper management of your printer itself. If you select print and scan, is again, like I mentioned before, you can use that to identify your spooler, maintain your printer. So the alignment I was talking about earlier on, or the calibration I was talking about earlier on, aligning and cleaning these ink cartridges just to ensure that everything continues to run smooth as far as your printer is concerned. And then you can also scan a document. So this is a typical example of a basic all-in-one printing device that you've got. So these are some of the things that you also, in your personal and professional spaces, that you might need to familiarize yourself with in terms of understanding exactly what's happening in that regard. So if we go back as far as our specific session there is concerned, I think we can reshare. Let me see here. We can reshare the screen that we were working with earlier. Where are we? Where is it? So what you've got is 2 seconds. So I'll go back to our images here. Okay, what's going on now? Sorted finally. Okay. So we were just discussing the whole concept of the spooler earlier, and then also looking at printer and print device, and then just showed you how to look at working with obviously adding or installing a printer to your computing system, and then also discussing the whole concept of what's happening with the drivers. So this is what I was mentioning earlier on about selecting the appropriate drivers dependent on the brand that you're working with. And then again, what you want to look at as a typical example of what a spooler would look like, showing you the actual document that is printing, what's the state of the document, who owns the document, literally creation there, how many pages you've got, the actual sizes, and what time that particular document was submitted, not forgetting the actual port that that specific printer is connecting to. So this is just a classic example of what a specific print spooler would distinctively look like as far as your printing is concerned. All right, so I think you can also look at what's happening with dye sublimation, thermal printers, and virtual printing from a research point of view, just understanding what's happening there. But what the other thing as well that you also might want to focus on, besides the laser print process and comparing dot matrix, inkjet, and laser printers, is also looking at basic troubleshooting. All right, so there's a distinctive difference between just troubleshooting printers in general, and then also looking at troubleshooting laser printers versus troubleshooting dot matrix printers versus troubleshooting laser printers. So some of the things that you might need to look out for would be ultimately different as compared to the others, dependent. But what is also important, I think, if you want to look at it from a notes point of view, I think if you go back to our notes here, what you also might find as relevant is just understanding the different tools of the trade that you also might want to familiarize yourself with. So tools of the trade when it comes to printing. So here, let's mention this as tools of the trade. All right, what are we looking at? Normally, you might want to have a multimeter, right? And obviously, these multimeters are responsible for just troubleshooting electrical problems, such as obviously issues with the wall sockets. I think we did cover this when we were discussing the whole concept of PSUs. I think I asked you to have a quick look at as far as that particular session there is concerned. And then the other things that you also might want to discuss is cleaning solutions. So cleaning solutions. All right, and as far as these particular cleaning solutions is concerned, things like denatured alcohol, just to ensure that you don't get dirty prints. You can also want to discuss. So here you can use things like extension magnets. So these magnets don't really look at detrimentally affecting your machine. Remember when we were discussing magnets, when we were looking at the whole concept of boards, we mentioned that you can literally damage your boards if you're going to be playing around with magnets willy-nilly, looking at the hard drives and so on. But in this instance, because you've got a very basic and literally small electronics board, what you're looking at using this particular magnet for is to just grab any loose screws that might have fallen into some tight spaces when it comes to your printers. So here we can talk about extension magnets. Magnets, so I think we're missing an S there. And then the other things that you also might want to discuss as far as basic tools of the trade there would go. So the fourth thing that we might want to add in there is so a thumb drive normally for installation of drivers and obviously checking patterns and print quality. So you can use an actual thumb drive here. So USB thumb drive. So the main purpose for this is, besides the whole issue of drivers, you can use that, or you can use it with, you can incorporate test patterns for checking for the actual quality of the print to ensure that should you have been troubleshooting it, you're good to go. And then obviously, where would PC text be without screwdrivers, the appropriate screwdrivers, all right? So screwdrivers. There you go. So that's that. Okay, so I think in terms of the actual tools, that's what you need to take into consideration. From a troubleshooting point of view, obviously you get certain issues like a print job never prints. You're looking at strange sizes that are printed when it comes to your particular copies, wrong colors, the list will go on and on. These are all examples of generic issues associated with printing. Associated with the whole concept of conversion soft to hard when it comes to copies. And then you are looking at troubleshooting impact printers, thermal printers, inkjet, and obviously your generic maintenance, which were some of the things that we looked at when we were looking at that program earlier on. But ultimately, I think what you need to literally focus on when it comes to from an assessment point of view, again, is just looking at the whole concept of troubleshooting. So this is what you also might want to read on further. So basic troubleshooting, and when you're looking at troubleshooting, I think your main focus would be on inkjet and laser printers, right? The reason why, obviously, these are the most common printers you'll find within the industry there. And then you also want to look at maintenance of those printers. So troubleshooting, and then also maintenance. So what this means is that when you're looking at basic troubleshooting there, you can also discuss, like we were mentioning earlier on, when you're looking at your laser printers, you want to discuss your generic laser print problems. So laser printer problems. Come on. So laser printer problems there that can include things like dirty or smudged printouts, ghosting. What's that all about in terms of how, what's actually incorporated there? So troubleshooting, look at that. Look at your inkjet printers. I think the other thing as well that you also want to discuss, especially when you're looking at the whole concept of inkjet printer problems there. So both would be looking at things like maintenance, ensuring that the printer is kept clean, periodic maintenance, just to ensure that everything is working without incident as far as basic functionality would go there. So I think that that literally covers what is relevant when it comes to this particular chapter. Really, yes, you will still have your thermal printers. So I think if you go back to what we initially listed, you will still need to look at we here. So you still need to incorporate or understand what's happening with thermal, dye sublimation, and obviously 3D. Not forgetting virtual printing as well there. But again, like I mentioned before, I think main focus from an assessment point of view is obviously going to be your impact inkjet and laser printers. As far as basic function would literally go there, right? So I think that literally covers that. Let's see if we've got any questions coming in on chat. No, nothing. I'm going to quickly see if I can unmute you guys, if there's anyone who needs to. So while I'm trying to do that, you can always post something on chat should you have something that you want to discuss. Give me 2 seconds. So while I'm unmuting, if anyone has got a pertinent question, you can post it on chat so long. Nothing coming through yet. Let's hold on there. Okay, so this is taking longer than seemed to be expected. So I think you might need to type out in chat there if you've got any questions, contributions, or concerns. Questions, contributions, or concerns from anyone? Questions, contributions, or concerns? I think there's something coming through here. Let's have a quick look. All right, so there is multimeter. Oh, okay, so tell me what a multimeter's main purpose is just to check for electrical power that should be coming from your socket. So normally, if you look at the PSU session that we had, what you're literally looking at is to test whether you've got proper power that is coming from your actual wall socket. So that you've got digital multimeters that are used to check for those measurements. Normally what they do indicate is whether you actually have power coming through or not. And if not, then it obviously might mean that your wall socket is problematic. If you're getting enough power, proper power, or clean power from your socket, then it might mean that you have power issues associated with the actual device or gadgets that you're working with. So you've got these digital multimeters that are responsible for troubleshooting electrical problems, and especially what you're looking at is faulty wall sockets within your environment. That's the reason why this would be obviously relevant in this instance, where you might find power is not being supplied properly to your printer. Is it the actual printer or the wall socket? So how you actually determine that is to use a multimeter. Making sense there? Making sense, Mtembu? Good to go. Cool. All right then. Anyone else with questions, contributions, and or concerns on the floor? Right, so it looks like nothing is coming through. So I think what I'll do is I'll upload this should you need to go through this as well, and then upload the notes. So sorry, not the notes. Okay, the notes and the slides actually. So the notes that we just created, and obviously the slides that are relevant for the actual prescribed textbook, I'll upload those a little later on today. And then if there's any questions or any issues that might arise from you going through that content again, you can always pop me in and then we can discuss these accordingly. But otherwise, if there are no questions, contributions, or any concerns on the floor, thanks for attending. Stay safe, keep smiling. We'll see you in the next session. Cheers.